Okay, so welcome to session 5 of I Forgive You. Now what? And hopefully by this point you've had a lot of opportunity to talk about with the group what forgiveness is, what it is not, and have a good foundation in those things because now we're going to talk about some miscellaneous stuff such as forgiveness versus trust versus enabling. We're going to talk about boundaries, repeat offenders, and justice. So forgiveness has happened, or let's theoretically say forgiveness has happened. What comes next? There are decisions that still need to be made. A decision has to be made on what type of relationship you will have now. As we discussed before, forgiveness does not require the maintaining of a relationship. This is a common misconception, but it might. So let's explore those things. Now, in the case of a minor offense, it is most likely you're going to resolve and maintain the relationship. Notice that I didn't just say maintain the relationship. I said resolve and maintain the relationship. So you have to have the forgiveness there, and you also need to resolve the situation. An example might be if you have a partner, a spouse or boyfriend, girlfriend who is hurting your feelings. And it's a small thing, and so it's very likely they don't even know they're doing it. But you can't just forgive and maintain the relationship because then that thing is going to keep happening. You have to address it and resolve it for there to be real progress. Now, when it comes to major offenses, now we're talking about redefining the relationship. So avoidance of setting new parameters is unhealthy for both sides and can lead to long-term damage to the relationship. So things to consider when redefining the relationship include boundaries and requirements, ending the relationship. We're going to talk about boundaries first. So setting boundaries and requirements doesn't necessarily involve having a special set of expertise. In a lot of cases, you just need to be told you're allowed to set boundaries. You're allowed to set requirements. Sometimes we feel like we don't have that right, but we do. We have the right to have healthy relationships and protect ourselves. So, one rule to remember in this process, though, is to be firm but kind. If you're establishing of these boundaries involves yelling, screaming, being passive aggressive, that's not doing it in a healthy way. That's not being firm and kind. So setting boundaries is healthy for you and the other person. And one reason for that is because it ends the enabling. Enabling is us feeding into a person's problem instead of teaching them accountability and responsibility. The word boundary can be misleading. Some people understand it as a way of keeping yourself separate, but boundaries are actually connecting points because they provide healthy rules for navigating the relationship, whether it's an intimate one or a professional one. There is a quote from Melissa Coates. She is a licensed professional counselor. In an article she wrote, she said, boundaries protect relationships from becoming unsafe. In that way, they actually bring us closer together than farther apart and are therefore necessary in any relationship. So what I want you to do right after I give you some examples is to pause the video and discuss with each other a example from your own life where you might be struggling to establish boundaries or aren't certain what appropriate boundaries would be in that situation, or you may want to share successes where you did establish boundaries and rules for a relationship and it went really well, either by protecting you and your family or by strengthening the relationship with that person. Share these things with each other. I'm going to give you some examples though, because maybe you don't feel comfortable sharing something from your personal life. So you might want to talk about an example in more general terms and just practice identifying what boundaries would be in given situations. So here's some examples. Maybe a teenager misuses the car. The boundary might be they can no longer use the car and you're protecting your property. Maybe the issue is that you have someone in your life who's addicted to drugs. And as much as you want to help that person, you have to establish healthy boundaries. That could be no drugs can be in the house. You can't be high in my home. I will not give you access to any funds. This could be different depending on if this person lives in your home or if they live outside of your home. Cases of adultery. If you decide to maintain a marriage in a case of adultery, there may be rules that need to be established, rules such as regular phone calls, being home at a certain time, having full access to email or phone or social media. And sometimes people think this is invasive and taking it a step too far, but it's not. The trust has been broken. Trust has to be reestablished. So these temporary requirements of I need you to give me full access to you and have you kind of checking in with me is not unreasonable. Demanding friends or family members, somebody who wants 24/7 physical or emotional support from you and is just taking advantage of your kindness. Set appropriate times. That might be a boundary, is to set appropriate times for communication. Set appropriate topics for communication. Or sometimes you may just have to flat out say no. Maybe you have work contacting you constantly and it's just taking up too much of your time. Maybe the boundary is that you need to establish your hours and stick to them. Use do not disturb or out of office features. Shut off your notifications from work. So these are just some examples that can maybe you can think of in your own life, or again, speak of in general terms with each other. Before you pause, I will say two more things. One, remember that in these situations, there sometimes will be pushback. People will feel like if you really forgave me, you can't give me rules, you can't give me requirements, you have to trust me right now. Because they think that's what forgiveness means and what it is. And that is not accurate. It is perfectly healthy to forgive and then establish some new criteria for the relationship to move forward in a healthy way. Also, boundaries and requirements will need to change. Notice I said will need to change, not that they can change. You'll have to be flexible because as the relationship progresses and it gets stronger, maybe weaker, you might have to tweak your boundaries. Maybe you lift some, maybe you add some. So just be prepared for that. So go ahead and pause right here and begin a really good discussion with each other on what boundaries look like in your given situations. Now let's talk about ending the relationship. And this is such a hard one, but sometimes this is what is best. Another place where people just need to be told it's okay. It's okay to end a relationship if it is not healthy or safe. So some examples might be if you have a family member, and by family member I mean somebody like a parent, a sibling, a cousin, or a very close friend who screams at you, berates you, violates your property, disrespects your children. There may come a point where you just have to cut that relationship off. So you can't compromise your own safety, you can't compromise the safety of the people in your home. So you may, and make sure in all these examples that you go to God, you ask for guidance, you ask for help, um, in what to do in this situation. Is it time to cut off that relationship? So go to God and make sure you're utilizing people in your life too that can provide good, godly counsel. It could be Christian friends who you trust and who you know will give you good counsel, or potentially a Christian counselor. So for all three of these examples I'm giving you, make sure you go to God first and then go to some good Christian counsel second. So the first one was family member that's in a bad way. Then there's work. Maybe your work is taking way too much time from your family. Maybe there's inappropriate speech actions happening. Maybe there's unethical requests being made of you. That it may also be time to end that relationship. And then there's divorce. Divorce is a sensitive topic. Some people think divorce is not okay in any situation, and some people think divorce is okay as just as long as you're unhappy in any situation. There are biblical reasons where it is acceptable to get divorced. This is abuse, abandonment, and adultery. Now, notice I didn't say that you have to get divorced. So, in example, adultery is an excellent example of this. You may choose to forgive but end that relationship. And as long as you've gone to God with this, and as long as you've taken these steps I mentioned previously, and it comes to that conclusion, then you don't need to feel shame from others for making a decision to end that relationship. If you decide to maintain that marriage, that is also a wonderful decision. You, in a case, of adultery, again, if you decide to maintain that marriage, you may have to go back to the boundaries and requirement stage so that you can work together to build up trust. I strongly encourage going to marriage counseling. But if you choose to end that relationship because you've already gone to God and you've gotten some good Christian counsel and have come to the conclusion that it's the best thing to do, then you can go ahead and you can forgive and you can move on without shame. So, if you would like to pause here and talk about the ending relationship portion of this study, if people have some stories to share or some questions to ask, go ahead and stop here. Next, we will talk about standing your ground. So just a brief note about standing your ground. All the above things does not mean you haven't forgiven, but the offender and sometimes society will try to tell you that. They'll try to tell you that you can't do these things if you've truly forgiven. They will try to tell you that if you've forgiven, you have to just let go and move on and let everything stay the same. And that is not correct. That is not healthy. And make sure you stand your ground when it comes to setting boundaries and protecting yourself, as well as trying to create an environment to build a relationship with that person. So when it comes to repeat offenders, you may wish I had something more profound to say here, but there's no limit as to how many times you have to forgive a repeat offender. This is a good time to read Matthew 18:21-22, whoever drew that one. You have to either set boundaries or end the relationship, but you can't not forgive. You can't go, this person has hurt me 10 times, so I'm done. They've used their limit. That's not how it works. Read Matthew 18 and understand that you have to continue to forgive, but like we were just discussing, it is okay to redefine the relationship and set some new parameters for the relationship. When it comes to justice, we must look at justice in a healthy way. So watch for revenge disguised as justice. An example would be over punishing a child. Is the punishment you're trying to give the child, does it go from a consequence meant to teach, or have you crossed the line and now it's revenge that you're trying to pass off as justice? Watch these things because the line is very fine. In the Old Testament, there were animal sacrifices that were meant for atonement. They were meant the animal sacrifices were made to pay for sin. However, they were atonement for sin, not absolution. In the New Testament, Christ came and he was our ultimate sacrifice. He paid for all of our sins, and this was complete absolution, not atonement. The laws outline the punishment for sin in books like Exodus and Leviticus and Numbers, for example. This was godly justice, not revenge. It is not our place to take matters into our own hands. That's a direct quote from We Messed Up by Bill Senyard. So just remember that it's not our place to take justice into our own hands. There are legally appointed systems, and we'll go ahead and talk about that now. Forgiveness is not the receipt of justice, nor is it the absolution from justice. The world might tell you that it's wrong to seek justice, or that it means you haven't forgiven. Some of the world might even tell you that you have to seek justice, that you absolutely must. The answer is really in the middle. So there is a place for justice. It is okay to pursue justice in the court, for example, but forgiveness cannot be dependent on it. You may get justice and you may not. You may receive an apology and you may not. The person may receive consequences for their actions and they may not. But your forgiveness cannot be dependent upon that because we've been commanded to provide forgiveness without any exceptions. So here's another example for you. Pressing charges, for example. If someone breaks into your house at night and steals from you, if someone steals your car, if someone assaults you, these are all just some examples where it is perfectly appropriate. It is not a sin to let the legally appointed system do its thing. Don't be foolish, protect yourself, but do not seek revenge. Make sure you forgive, do not seek revenge, but let the legally appointed system do what it does to protect people from these type of crimes. Also, another point I want to make is to analyze your response or the punishment that you've issued. So, for example, is the purpose of your response, was it to create a boundary, protect yourself, provide a teachable moment, or was your response seeking atonement? trying to hurt, aiming for revenge. If that's the case, you want to make sure to analyze your response and redirect it in a different way. So this is a good point to stop and share your thoughts with each other on justice. Maybe you hadn't understood the difference between atonement and absolution up until now, or you have questions about some of the laws that were in the Old Testament and how they apply today, or maybe you have a specific example in your life where you're just not quite sure how to respond appropriately without potentially crossing a line. This is a good time to talk about those things with each other. I want to thank you all for doing this study with me. I hope you got a lot out of it. I hope you have a much better understanding of what forgiveness is, what it is not, how to go about it. And I hope it also gives you a great deal of peace to be able to carry this out and move on without the burden of unforgiveness.